1460 and heard around the world on WVOX.com. This is Jack McGuirk and Ken Kraetzer bringing you a half-hour discussion of issues about veterans and the active military. Now, here's Ken.
Hey, thanks, Jack. Good afternoon, everyone listening to CaMMVetsMedia here on WVOX 1460. And CaMMVets stands for Cadets, Midshipmen, Military, and Veterans who have been proudly covering since 2008. A couple of quick sports things before we get into our military topics. I was up at Iona's game on Friday night at Maris. They played really well. Coach Patino said it was their best game of the year. They won 84-57. Their hot shooting guard, Dennis Jenkins, had 23 points. Then they go to Quinnipiac yesterday, Jack, and they had a clunker. That's the only way I can describe it. I wasn't there. I'll tell you about the game I was at. But they lost 81-58 to Quinnipiac. Dennis had 17 points. But most of the other scoring players really struggled. Cruz Davis, the freshman, at 13 points. But they're playing without Walter Clayton this weekend. And worked Friday night, didn't work Saturday. So Coach Patino will be putting it back together for their games. They have a couple of home games this weekend on Friday night and Sunday. I was at the Army hockey game yesterday.
That was against your alma mater, I think, right, Providence?
Yeah, against Providence, where I started broadcasting as a college student back in the 70s. When Lou Lamorello was the coach
always
there.
Makes it interesting.
And it had special significance because you may not have heard about this, Jack, but there was an accident in the Army hockey game Thursday in Bridgeport, Connecticut against Sacred Heart. Maybe you're going to have him. I'm going to steal a story from you.
Yeah.
But what happened was one of the Army hockey players, Eric Huss, was getting next to a player who got spun around in a collision, and he got hit in the neck by a skate blade.
Yeah.
And it tore open his neck, and he was able to skate towards the bench, and the trainer jumped out and grabbed his throat and his artery and held it together for the whole ride. They got him, by ambulance to the hospital in Bridgeport, right into surgery to be attended to. And the trainer, Rachel Leahy, is considered a hero. She was recognized before the game yesterday for what can only be described as life-saving treatment. That she knew exactly what to do. In a situation you have no prep time, it just happens, and she knew exactly what to do. They said she'd never handled a situation like that, but she was able to handle and help the player who's an Army soldier. Anybody who's an athlete at West Point's a soldier or a cadet. And then Army was playing the number 10 team in the country. They lost 2 games last week by 5-1 and 5-0, and they beat Providence 4-3 in a shootout, overtime. And they had to score a goal to tie the game on a power play with about a minute left to go. And they had 2,200 of the game. It was just phenomenal. So a neat moment at West Point, and shows the value of athletic trainers. We all know about the Buffalo Bills situation, and how the trainers, the NHL is massive. The NFL now has massive medical resources at every game. They had an agreement with the Players Association, but not every college and high school does. But West Point's well equipped, and they had one of their best people at that game, fortunately, on the road, and so the player was taken care of. In the second half of the show, we're going to talk to one of our kind of regular guests, Rear Admiral Rabbi Harold Robinson. He's going to talk a little bit about our update on our work to update the chaplains' monuments at Arlington National Cemetery. And as it happens, there's a related story on the front page of the New York Times about efforts to update and add names to the Korean War Memorial and how difficult a process they found that.
And just to piggyback on what you're talking about at West Point, the trainer Rachel Leahy saving the life of the forward Eric Haas, who had that neck injury, which is a serious injury. About a year ago, there was a similar incident in Connecticut where a Connecticut high school ice hockey player had a similar neck injury. Unfortunately, he passed away from that. And going way back in the NHL, there was a hockey goalie, Clinton Marlachek, of the Buffalo Sabres, who got an ice skate to the neck, and in that case, it was pretty graphic, bleeding all over the ice. But their trainer, who was actually a former Army combat medical guy from, who served in Vietnam, who was a medic in Vietnam, he actually saved Clint Marlachek's life. He kept pressure on the neck to stop the bleeding, they got into the hospital and saved him. And but in this case, Eric, as they got into the hospital, underwent surgery to close up his neck, and it sounds like he was able to go back to West Point the next day, which is pretty amazing.
Yeah, we had surgery, but we talked a little bit to Army hockey coach Brian Riley after the game last night. He said there was a 5 to 10 minute window that they had to stop the bleeding, and they did, and got him to the hospital. They said the trainer never took her fingers off of his neck during the whole time getting to the hospital, running the surgery. And yeah, the picture of him in the hospital smiling with a thumbs up, when I saw it on Twitter, at 299,000 pages.
Wow.
And that was Friday afternoon.
Yeah. It's a pretty amazing story there up at West Point. But switching gears a little bit to what's happening in Ukraine. Over the weekend, actually, over in that part of the world, when they celebrate Christmas, Orthodox Christmas for the Ukrainian Russian Orthodox churches there. But Russian President Vladimir Putin on Wednesday sent a frigate armed with the country's latest Zircon hypersonic missile on a trans-ocean cruise in a show of force as tensions with the West escalate in that war. Russia touts that the Zircon missile can evade any Western air defenses by flying at an astounding 7,000 miles per hour. It was commissioned by the Navy in 2018 following long trials. The Admiral Gorshkov is the first ship in a new series of frigates which were designed to replace the aging Soviet-built destroyers as a key strike component of Russian Navy. Armed with an array of missiles, the ship is 130 meters or about 427 feet long, has a crew of about 200. In 2019, it circled the world's oceans in a 35,000 nautical mile journey. Putin has hailed Zircon as a potent weapon capable of penetrating any existing anti-missile defenses by flying, as I said, 9 times faster than the speed of sound at a range of more than over 620 miles. So it's a pretty scary hypersonic weapon, and now this new ship, I guess, is going on a trans-ocean cruise to kind of show it off.
Well, if they're bringing the ship in from the Pacific, probably. But what's interesting is the way you describe it. It can go 7,000 miles an hour, but its range is only 650.
Yeah.
So they can only get to that speed for a brief moment. The challenge is that kind of speed can evade a lot of the radar, and also the missile response that can be made with that kind of speed. The challenge is Russians are going to spend a lot of money on that one missile. One missile probably costs them tens of millions of dollars. So you can't fire them that often, and the U.S. and Ukraine will figure out a way to knock them down.
Indeed, and the U.S., we talked about it last week, is working on their own hypersonic missile system, so we'll keep an eye on that story. And we talked about countries in Eastern Europe building up their defenses, and now Raytheon has awarded a $208 million contract to arm Romania, which is a Black Sea state right on the coast of the Black Sea, and a member of NATO, with mobile coastal anti-ship missile batteries. Pentagon announced that last week. Working with Norwegian company Kongsberg, Raytheon will provide Romania an unspecified number of naval strike missiles, coastal defense systems, as part of a deal that could be worth up to $217 million after all the options are exercised. Romania has more than a 100-mile coastline on the Black Sea, which is home to Russia's Navy Black Sea Fleet. We've talked about the Russian Navy in the Black Sea firing missiles at Ukraine. But that missile system, the NSM, was developed initially for the Royal Norwegian Navy as a modern anti-ship missile with a range of more than 100 nautical miles for its surface fleet. The ground-based launcher system was developed by Kongsberg and part of an export sales paired with a command and control system. The U.S. and Romania signed a deal to get those missiles in 2021, in addition to Norway and the U.S. and Poland, using Australia, the U.K., Canada, the Netherlands, Spain, Malaysia, Germany also plan to use those missiles. The U.S. primarily fields the NSMs on patrol combat ships for patrols in the Western Pacific, but again, another country building up their defenses very close to Russia.
Well, it's a huge arms race going on right now with missiles and missile defense. Just reminds me when I was at the Association of U.S. Army Conference in Washington at their trade show, which is basically all defense companies. You couldn't walk down the aisles at 11 o'clock on the first day. There is so much going on with both U.S. Purchase of defense systems and foreign ones to our allies.
And the U.S. announced its largest Ukrainian aid package yet, worth $3.7 billion, which includes Bradleys and other armored vehicles, as well as $907 million in more financing for Ukraine and its neighbors to buy American-made weapons and equipment. The deal includes 50 Bradley infantry fighting vehicles with 500 TOW anti-tank missiles, 250,000 rounds of 25mm ammunition, armored personnel carriers, resistant ambush protected vehicles, mobility multi-purpose wheeled vehicles, howitzers, ammunition, also 155mm artillery rounds, rounds of remote anti-armor mine systems, and additional ammunition for the high-mobility artillery rocket systems. We talked about those in the past. So this is a big package heading to Ukraine, $3.75 billion.
Yeah. The challenge, what's happening is they're gearing up for what they think is going to be a big spring offensive by both sides, and you can see a really climactic period. And the Ukrainians need the light armor vehicles, the Bradleys, to help move their infantry forward against, and then also defend against the Russian tanks. So it is going to be quite a conflict in the spring. Decisive, and both sides are gearing up for it.
And Australia announced they're building up their defenses with more than $700 million on new advanced missiles, rocket systems, including the U.S.-made HIMARS, which have been successfully used by the Ukrainian military. So Australia building up their defense. They're a little bit more concerned with China in that part of the world. You're listening to the CaMMVets Radio Report on WVOX 1460, heard around the world on WVOX.com. We'll be right back after this brief Fox News break, so stay tuned.
I gotta stop that.
I'll do it.
Good world and news. Here is the latest update from Fox News Radio.